They said she was too harsh, too demanding, too tough on the recruits. Then war came, and her soldiers were the only ones who came home alive. And Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez's voice could shatter glass at 50 yards. At 32, she was the toughest drill instructor at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and the only female training male recruits in basic combat training. Her trainees called her the Iron Maiden behind her back, not because she was cruel, but because she forged them into unbreakable soldiers. But when Colonel James Patterson decided that female drill sergeants were bad for unit morale, Elena faced the fight of her career. What he didn't know was that in 3 months, her current training platoon would face real combat in Afghanistan, and Elena's excessive training methods were the only thing standing between her soldiers and body bags. NTHE morning started like any other in Elena's perfectly organized barracks. 0530 hours, Reveille. Her 42 male recruits stumbled out of their bunks as Elena's voice boomed through the building. Move it, move it, move it. The enemy doesn't wait for you to finish your beauty sleep. Private Johnson, a 19-year-old from Ohio, was 30 seconds late to formation. Elena was in his face instantly. Johnson, drop and give me 50. If you're late to formation, you'll be late to save your buddy's life. Have you ever had someone push you harder than you thought you could handle, only to realize later they saved your life? Elena Martinez lived by one rule: better to sweat in training than bleed in combat. But her superiors were about to discover that removing the toughest trainer might cost more lives than they ever imagined. And after morning PT, Elena noticed Colonel Patterson observing from the administration building. His disapproving frown was visible even from across the training field. She knew what was coming: another complaint about her aggressive training methods, another suggestion that female drill sergeants should train female recruits only. But Elena also knew something Patterson didn't. Her last 3 graduating classes had the lowest casualty rates of any unit in Afghanistan. Her harsh methods saved lives, and she wasn't about to apologize for keeping soldiers alive. NTHAT afternoon, Elena received the summons she'd been expecting: report to Colonel Patterson's office at 1600 hours. As she walked across the base, she felt the weight of every soldier she'd trained, every life she'd helped preserve through rigorous preparation. The meeting would determine not just her career, but the fate of 42 young men who needed every ounce of toughness she could instill in them before they faced real bullets, and Elena didn't know what was coming next. Colonel Patterson's office felt like a tribunal. Sitting behind his mahogany desk, flanked by 2 male officers, Patterson gestured for Elena to remain standing. Staff Sergeant Martinez, we've received numerous complaints about your training methods. Parents calling their congressmen, recruits requesting transfers, reports of excessive physical and psychological pressure. Elena's jaw tightened, but she remained at attention. She'd heard this before: strong female leadership labeled as excessive, while male drill sergeants using identical methods were called tough but fair. Sir, with respect, my methods produce results. My units have the highest pass rates and lowest combat casualty rates in the entire training command, Elena responded, her voice steady despite the anger building inside. Patterson waved dismissively. Statistics can be misleading, Sergeant. What matters is maintaining proper training environment and unit cohesion. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to train female recruits only. Your current platoon will be turned over to Staff Sergeant Williams. Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. Staff Sergeant Williams was competent but gentle, the kind of instructor who believed in building confidence through encouragement rather than testing limits through adversity. In 3 months, her 42 recruits would be in Afghanistan. Williams' approach wouldn't prepare them for the brutal reality of combat, where hesitation meant death and weakness meant casualties. But Elena was about to discover that sometimes the only way to protect your soldiers is to disobey direct orders. Sir, I request permission to complete training with my current platoon. They're 8 weeks into a 12-week program. Changing instructors now would... Patterson cut her off. The decision is final, Sergeant. Your replacement begins Monday. Elena saluted crisply, but her mind was already working on an alternative plan. She would not let 42 young men die because her superiors couldn't handle a tough female drill sergeant. Elena didn't go home that Friday evening. Instead, she went to the barracks where her recruits were enjoying weekend downtime. "Listen up!" she shouted, her voice carrying through the building. Weekend Liberty is canceled. We're doing advanced combat training. Off the books. Private Johnson raised his hand. But Sergeant, we're not supposed to. Johnson, did I ask for your opinion? Formation in 10 minutes. Full gear. What Elena did next would either save lives or end her military career. She began teaching her recruits advanced combat techniques, not scheduled until week 10 of training. Urban warfare tactics, IED recognition, advanced marksmanship under stress, medical training for gunshot wounds. These were lessons typically saved for specialized units, but Elena knew her recruits would face these situations in Afghanistan whether they were officially prepared or not. Private Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, approached her during a break. Sergeant, why are you doing this? You could get in serious trouble. Elena looked at the young man, barely 18, skinny kid from Texas who'd enlisted to pay for college. In 3 months, he'd be dodging Taliban bullets in Kandahar. Martinez, would you rather face a court-martial or explain to your mother why I didn't prepare you for war? The private nodded and returned to training. NBUT Elena's unauthorized training sessions didn't go unnoticed. Monday morning brought Staff Sergeant Williams and a very angry Colonel Patterson to the training grounds. Sergeant Martinez, what is the meaning of this unauthorized training? Patterson's face was red with fury as he surveyed the advanced obstacle course Elena had constructed over the weekend, but Elena was about to give him an answer he'd never forget. Sir, I'm conducting supplemental training to ensure these soldiers are combat ready, Elena replied, standing at attention while her recruits continued their exercises. Patterson was furious. You were given direct orders to transfer training responsibilities. This is insubordination. Elena made a decision that would define her legacy. Sir, yes sir. I disobeyed orders because following them would get these men killed. NTHE statement hung in the air like a dropped grenade. Patterson stepped closer. Sergeant Martinez, you are relieved of duty pending court-martial proceedings. Report to the base commander immediately. But Elena wasn't finished. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a letter from General Patricia Hayes, the same general who had supported Sarah Mitchell. Sir, I took the liberty of requesting a review of training protocols from Pentagon Command. Patterson's face went white as he read the letter. General Hayes had authorized an immediate investigation into training effectiveness, specifically comparing casualty rates between different drill sergeant approaches. Elena had documented everything: her methods, her results, and the decision to remove her from training male recruits. The investigation would either vindicate her approach or end her career, but it would be based on facts rather than bias. Furthermore, sir, Elena continued, I've been in contact with combat veterans from my previous training classes. They've provided testimony about how my training methods saved their lives in Afghanistan. Private Rodriguez, now Sergeant Rodriguez, credits my IED recognition training with saving his entire squad. Elena handed Patterson a thick folder of testimonials from soldiers she'd trained. Each letter detailed how her excessive training had prepared them for real combat situations. As Patterson reviewed the testimonials, Elena noticed her current recruits had stopped training and were watching the confrontation. These young men, who had complained about her harsh methods just weeks earlier, now understood what she'd been preparing them for. Private Johnson stepped forward. Sir, request permission to speak. Patterson nodded, curious about what the recruit would say. Sir, Staff Sergeant Martinez has been harder on us than any instructor I've ever had. But last weekend, she taught us things that could save our lives. Urban combat techniques, advanced medical training, psychological preparation for taking enemy fire. She didn't have to do that. She was already being reassigned. She did it because she cares whether we come home alive. The other recruits nodded in agreement, a show of solidarity Elena never expected. Private Martinez added, Sir, my brother served in Afghanistan last year. When I told him about Sergeant Martinez's training, he said she was preparing us for reality, not for parade ground formations. He wishes he'd had training like this before deployment. Elena felt a surge of pride as her recruits, the same young men who had cursed her name during brutal training sessions, now defended her methods. But Patterson wasn't swayed by testimonials. Regardless of effectiveness, military discipline requires following orders. Sergeant Martinez, flagrantly disobeyed direct commands. Elena knew this was her last chance to make her case. "Sir, I followed my oath to prepare soldiers for combat. Sometimes following orders conflicts with saving lives. I chose to save lives." The confrontation was reaching its climax, and Elena was about to learn whether the military valued effectiveness over compliance. General Hayes arrived at Fort Knox 3 days later to conduct her investigation personally. Elena found herself in the base conference room, facing a panel that would determine her fate: General Hayes, Colonel Patterson, Base Commander Colonel Rodriguez, and 3 Pentagon officials. The proceeding felt like a trial, with Elena's career hanging in the balance. Staff Sergeant Martinez, General Hayes began, "You stand accused of disobeying direct orders, conducting unauthorized training, and insubordination. How do you plead?" Elena stood at attention. "General, I acknowledge disobeying orders, but I request permission to explain my actions." General Hayes nodded. "Proceed, Sergeant." Elena had prepared for this moment. "General, in 12 years of military service, I've trained over 800 soldiers for combat deployment. My units have a 97% graduation rate and a casualty rate 60% lower than average. When Colonel Patterson ordered me to stop training male recruits, he wasn't just reassigning me, he was condemning young soldiers to inadequate preparation for combat." NSHE pulled out her documentation. "These are combat reports from Afghanistan, detailing how soldiers from my training classes outperformed others in urban warfare, IED detection, and stress response. My excessive training methods are excessive only compared to inadequate standards that get soldiers killed." Elena had turned her court-martial into an indictment of the entire training system. General Hayes reviewed Elena's evidence for 20 minutes while the room remained silent. Finally, she looked up. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, your documentation is impressive. Colonel Patterson, can you explain why effective training methods were discontinued?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "General, there were complaints about training intensity and concerns about female instructors training male recruits." Colonel Patterson, are you suggesting that gender is more important than combat effectiveness? General Hayes' question cut to the heart of the issue. Patterson's response revealed the real problem. "General, unit cohesion and morale are important factors in training effectiveness." Elena realized this wasn't about training methods. It was about male officers uncomfortable with female authority. General Hayes turned back to Elena. "Sergeant Martinez, you disobeyed direct orders. In the military, this typically results in court-martial and discharge. However, your documentation suggests these orders may have been improper." Elena held her breath as the general continued. "I'm ordering an immediate review of all training protocols and instructor assignments at Fort Knox." NTHE announcement sent shockwaves through the room. General Hayes was launching a full investigation into whether gender bias had influenced training decisions. Elena's rebellion had exposed systematic problems in military training assignments. But the general wasn't finished. Furthermore, Staff Sergeant Martinez will resume training her current platoon while this investigation proceeds. And over the next month, General Hayes' investigation uncovered a pattern of female drill sergeants being reassigned from male recruit training based on complaints that were never investigated. Elena wasn't the only effective instructor removed due to gender bias. It was happening across multiple bases. The military was systematically removing successful female trainers because male officers were uncomfortable with female authority. Elena returned to training her platoon with renewed purpose. The recruits, now understanding what she'd risk for them, threw themselves into training with unprecedented dedication. Private Johnson, who had initially resented Elena's harsh methods, became her most devoted student. "Sergeant Martinez, teach us everything. We don't want to let you down in Afghanistan," he told her after a particularly grueling combat exercise. NTHE final weeks of training were the most intensive Elena had ever conducted. She pushed her recruits beyond standard requirements, preparing them for the brutal reality of combat deployment. Advanced marksmanship, urban warfare tactics, psychological preparation for killing enemy combatants, medical training for treating traumatic injuries. Elena's curriculum was more comprehensive than what many Special Forces units received. Graduation day arrived with unprecedented ceremony. General Hayes personally attended to observe Elena's platoon demonstrate their combat skills. The 42 recruits performed flawlessly, showcasing abilities far beyond standard basic combat training requirements. Elena felt overwhelming pride as she watched young men she'd transformed from teenagers into combat-ready soldiers. Elena's platoon deployed to Afghanistan 2 months after graduation. Within their first week in-country, they encountered a complex IED ambush that had killed members of previous units. But Elena's soldiers were ready. They detected the IEDs using techniques she'd taught them, responded to ambush with tactics she'd drilled into them, and provided medical aid using skills she'd insisted they master. 0 casualties. Elena's platoon was the first unit in that sector to survive the notorious ambush site without losses. The after-action report specifically credited their superior training in IED recognition, urban combat tactics, and trauma medicine, all areas where Elena had exceeded standard training requirements despite orders to stop. Colonel Patterson was quietly reassigned to a desk job at the Pentagon. General Hayes implemented the Martinez Protocol, new training standards requiring all drill sergeants to meet Elena's elevated combat preparation requirements regardless of gender. Female drill sergeants could no longer be reassigned from male recruit training without demonstrated cause related to performance rather than gender. Elena was promoted to Sergeant First Class and appointed senior drill instructor for the entire Fort Knox Training Command. Her first official act was implementing advanced combat training for all recruits, male and female. The methods she'd been punished for teaching were now mandatory curriculum. Her rebellion had changed military training forever. NTWO years later, Elena stood before another group of new recruits. But this time was different. Half the drill sergeants under her command were women, all trained in her advanced methods. The complaints about excessive training had disappeared, replaced by requests from combat units for soldiers trained under the Martinez Protocol. And Private Johnson, now Sergeant Johnson, returned from his second Afghanistan deployment to serve as Elena's assistant instructor. "Sergeant Martinez saved my life a dozen times over there," he told new recruits. "Every technique she taught us, every standard she held us to, every time she pushed us beyond what we thought we could handle, it all mattered when bullets started flying." Elena's story became required reading at military leadership schools, not because of her training methods, but because of her courage to prioritize soldier welfare over career advancement. She had demonstrated that sometimes following orders conflicts with saving lives, and that effective leaders must be willing to sacrifice their careers for their soldiers' survival. NTHE rebellion that nearly ended Elena's career had transformed her into one of the most respected drill sergeants in military history. Her 42 recruits became ambassadors for female leadership, telling anyone who would listen about the tough female sergeant who prepared them for war when male officers wanted to go easy on them. Elena Martinez proved that strength isn't about gender, it's about commitment to excellence and willingness to sacrifice for others. Her story showed that the toughest training creates the strongest soldiers, regardless of who's doing the training. Female drill sergeants weren't too harsh. Previous training standards were too lenient for the reality of modern combat. NHER rebellion against orders to go easy on recruits saved lives and changed military culture. Elena demonstrated that sometimes the most loyal act is disobedience, choosing soldiers, survival over superior officers, comfort. Her legacy lives in every soldier trained under the Martinez Protocol, every female drill sergeant authorized to train male recruits, and every life saved by superior preparation. Elena Martinez didn't just rebel against orders, she rebelled against a system that valued compliance over competence, comfort over combat readiness, and gender stereotypes over military effectiveness. Her toughness didn't break soldiers, it forged them into warriors who came home alive. Years later, when asked about her decision to disobey orders, Elena's answer was simple: "I'd rather face a court-martial than explain to a mother why her son died because I didn't prepare him for war." Military discipline is important, but saving soldiers' lives is more important. Her rebellion proved that the strongest leaders are those willing to sacrifice everything for the people they serve.